This is Vomiting Rainbows, episode 34. And we talk about children, and we talk about...
That's a charitable way of putting it.
We do. We talk about the
Supermarket murder?
Supermarket murders and also gender issues that you really need to dive into them early. And then we also, we ended on a light note, which is more of a whodunit. Or why was it done? Maybe not a whodunit, but why was it done?
A domestic why done it.
Exactly. So listen to this episode and enjoy. This is Vomiting Rainbows, episode number 34, with Blag Dahlia as our guest host. And this is a podcast where I tell Blag 3 stories that he knows nothing about. He chews them up into a wonderful rainbow and spits them right back at me.
It's easy to find stuff I know nothing about, too. I mean, there's a vast world of stuff I know nothing about, Doug.
Well, in this podcast, one of the first things that I'm going to ask you is, have you seen the movie Capturing the Friedmans?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I did know about that one, didn't I?
You did?
Yeah.
We're actually redoing this segment because I put Ben out. And when I did that, I accidentally released that part of the clip. Ben. So I think that's a note for us in the future, not to get rid of Ben. So we'll continue with the podcast about Capturing the Friedmans. Okay, so now that Ben is gone, back to the podcast already in progress.
Good old Benjamin.
I know. Now he's just going to stand outside the door and cry. It's so much less professional than our K-Fog podcast.
It's the same thing that I do when I go to the bar with you and I see all the girls making a fuss about you and nobody's talking to me. I go outside the door and I just start crying softly to myself.
You just sit outside and scratch at the door.
Scratch at the door, please. I used to be hip.
Oh, stop. So yeah, that Capturing the Friedmans. So you were about to say that you actually...
I saw that one, and that's the one where you kind of start sympathizing with his family, and then you realize that the father is certainly a child molester.
Yeah,
right?
Without a doubt, unequivocally a child molester.
Wow, I mean, it's so... That just stirs you up as a human being, doesn't it? It just hits your sense of what's reasonable and what isn't, and it just kills you.
It was like you start to empathize with this family. You're like, I don't know I didn't know anything about the story, just started watching it, and all of a sudden, you feel this moment where he gets that letter in the mail, and the postal inspector says he was getting child pornography. And you're like, okay, well, maybe it was a mistake or maybe it was wrong. And so they deliver it directly to him. And he says, thank you. And then he writes a letter promising a gift of more child pornography to the person in the Netherlands. And that's when it started. Then that's when you're like, okay.
He wrote a letter?
Yeah.
God, I mean, how stupid could you be?
And then the case was...
I mean, the only thing worse than a child molester is a really dumb child molester.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. That was one of the things that I thought was crazy about that. And then they walk down in his basement, and he's got this computer lab. And he's been teaching students, men who are children who are in teens to elementary school computer skills.
Right.
And then that starts to open the door to the fact that, was he molesting these children in the computer lab?
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
right.
I haven't seen this film in a long time.
Yeah.
It really stirs you up, man. There's just nothing worse. That subject.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, too, is... they pull his son in, who helped him run the computer lab, and his son. This is where it gets really weird, because two other kids in the computer lab testified, and a lot of others said that things happened to them, and they were touched inappropriately in the computer lab.
Wow!
And then all these charged 34 counts of. I mean, I'm not sure.
Did he touch his own son? As well?
Well, that's the other thing, too.
Oh, man.
So there was insinuations that he had three sons. One son, David, was adamant that while he had child pornography, he never did anything or acted on it. And his wife, who also said, well, she said they probably had sex the amount of times that they had children.
Wow.
Yeah. And she said it was very mechanical.
Oh.
So she didn't seem like it was a very loving relationship.
Right.
And her son...
Well, they were married.
Yeah.
Doug.
Yeah.
You know how sex can get.
I've never been married.
Oh, see, that's why. You don't know.
But you have, so you can jump right into this.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, nothing dries it up quicker. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So anyway, he like his son David was is like one of his biggest like advocates. He says, my dad was railroaded. This was all like a lot of these things were just made up. This is not what it was. And so, but Jesse, who was the youngest, was the one who was in charge of the computer lab. And he went away for like, I think 7 years or something of that nature. And he's been released, and now he writes books on like WordPress or something.
Oh, went away because he was arrested for also molesting people?
He went to prison.
Wow. So he took part in it with his dad. It wasn't that. So that would suggest that his dad probably did it to him, and then he did it to other people, right?
Well, he said that when facing this crime, he didn't want to plead guilty, but the evidence was so overwhelming against him that he felt like he would go away either for life or, you know, he just didn't feel like there was an option. He had to plead guilty or he would never see time out of jail.
Wow.
So
he still claims his own innocence?
Yeah, he still says he's innocent.
Wow.
So so his son or his father pled guilty to give his son less time, basically saying it's my fault that my son took these actions. My dad molested me, and he even claimed that he molested his brother. And his brother says, I don't remember being molested by him. I think he's making this up. But
wow.
Yeah.
It's a tangled web, isn't it?
And his brother is still like kind of behind him.
Figuratively.
Right. So he said that he later, when interviewed, the father said, I never molested any of the children in the computer room. That was not something I did. He said, I did molest 2 children, and it was at a cabin that we had in like a summer cabin. And he said he deeply regretted it. He knew it was wrong. But he said he swears he did not ever molest.
See, so here's where you get into some really deep stuff, and people are going to hate me for this, but the kind of thing I wonder about is like, I mean,
people are going to hate you for some sort of
comment I made. I mean, think about this. I mean, think about how sort of pathetic it is if you're, say, a gay person and you never act on being gay your entire life. I mean, you'd think, oh, well, you really missed an opportunity to have a fulfilling sex life. But especially, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, people had to do that all the time. I mean, now there's more acceptance of it, and so people can kind of move on their life. I mean, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that one is a child molester, which is horrible and the worst thing you can be.
Right.
Still, it's like, to not act on it, or to only act on it twice in your life, if that indeed is the case. I mean, there's something really odd about that too. It's like, well, but this is what you want. This is your sexuality. Is it really believable that anyone would only act on it twice in their entire life? I mean, I don't buy that. And if it is true, it's sort of like, what a bizarre sort of repressed child molester that you'd only do it twice. I mean, a lot of these guys do it hundreds of times. I mean, they're obsessed. They can't stop,
As a former child, I'm really happy that more people aren't acting on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, of course.
But yeah, I think one of the things that is just absolutely, it speaks to a lot of the children who came forward were coached by child therapists, and a lot of them were hypnotized and had repressed memories. So it starts.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that stuff, and it's more like, look, if this guy had a bunch of child pornography, I mean, you got to remember, just possessing that stuff means that you're abetting these children being molested, right? Like, even if you never molest a kid, if you just regularly consume child pornography, you're adding to this, because
those children
somewhere,
are being,
these
somebody's
kids are being
taking
molested.
So yeah, one of the things that I thought was crazy about the story is the standing behind, like his family really stood behind him, and his wife was like, no, he sucks, he's a terrible person. And they have these very candid arguments that they recorded on video. And
so the wife doesn't leave him.
No.
She stays with him, but takes the position that he's a horrible person.
Exactly.
She just doesn't believe in divorce or something.
I feel like she's like, for better or worse. She was like,
stand by your man.
She was like,
Wow.
this is the worst of the worst, but I guess I'll just stay. She eventually, she does divorce him, but it was like not way until like he was already in prison. So, you know, the one thing that was really interesting about this is the court system actually came out, and I think the attorney general relooked at this case and said that Jesse, while they don't know his actual involvement, they think he should be. If this trial was done now, he probably wouldn't be convicted. This scenario wouldn't happen.
Because people wouldn't believe the kid's testimony?
Yeah, because the testimony was so poorly handled.
Well, remember, there was that famous case of the McMartin preschool where supposedly there was these horrible child molesting crimes being taken place where, you know, the entire faculty was involved and, you know,
Right.
kids recount all 30 of them in a room and they're all being molested. And people said, wow, this is the most horrible thing ever. And it turned out to be a complete farce with no basis in fact.
Right, exactly.
You know? And I guess, I mean, what this sort of points to is, you know, that witch hunt mentality, right, which can happen where people just sort of get infected with the need to say what is expected of them to say or what they think authority figures want them to say.
And that's exactly what they were saying. Like throughout this entire thing, all the brothers were saying, how could these people like come to class? And many of these people took the beginner class and then had the summer off and then reapplied for the advanced class.
Right.
So if they're getting horribly abused, which these recounts were like horrendous, like if they were that horrendous, why did they come back and reapply? You think that they would be screaming to their parents like, I don't want to go back there. I don't want like.
I don't know if it's okay to go off on a tangent here, but I had a similar thought about this Bill Cosby thing.
Okay.
Because on the one hand, Cosby's been accused now by so many women who recount essentially the same story, which is that, you know, it's his turn on to kind of, you know, give you some drugs, knock you out and make you semi-conscious and essentially rape you. That it really seems like it couldn't possibly be false that all of these people would come out and say it. Because, yeah, sometimes, you know, one person, two people come out and say something and it's untrue. When you've got over 50 women just coming out of the woodwork saying, yes, this happened to me, this guy did this, it's hard to believe it isn't true. At the same time, in the case of this woman who's in court with him and several who have testified, they maintained a relationship with him. They continued coming over. They continued hanging out. They continued taking phone calls. They continued asking for favors. You saw this with the Trump thing when a lot of women came out and said, he groped me, he went after me, or whatever. No one accused him of rape per se, although his first wife did and then recanted on it.
I can literally feel people tuning out of this podcast right now.
Just because we're talking about Trump?
No, I can feel them
just
tuning
the
out
anger.
because, I can feel them going, okay, wait, so is Blag pro Cosby?
Right, of course not.
Trump?
Look, I didn't vote for Trump, and I never thought Bill Cosby was funny. And again, as I said, all these women saying this about Cosby suggest to me that it's probably true. But I have to wonder if someone's gone through this horrible experience, why in God's name would you call the person again? And I was reminded of it when you talked about how kids came back and took the course again. Or in the case of Trump, you know, one of the women who said, yes, you know, he came after me, he stuck his tongue down my throat, he was inappropriate, it was wrong. She was asking him for a job and for references for years after. I mean, at what point do we say, look, you know, you kind of got to shit or get off the pot in this concept. If you've undergone some horrible thing, then the buck stops there, and you don't continue asking for favors or trying to get something else. You know what I mean? I mean, not to try and blame the victim by any stretch of the imagination, but at the very least, it weakens your case if you plan to go and then bring charges against this person, and you're going to say, oh, incidentally, for a year or two, I kept hitting him up for a job, or I kept hitting him up for advice or help. I figured maybe I could get something out of it. I mean, if you,
again, a lot of the things that the most credible accuser, or the strongest case that they have, is the one that they're going for right now. The reason that they're going with this one is because she said, I didn't know this was happening. Like, I just thought I passed out at the house, and then I would wake up, and then things would happen, and then it just, over time, she was able to, like, more, not in a repressed memory way. It just, I think she put it together over time, but it was Bill Cosby. I feel like that's her.
I mean, again, if the timeline, and I don't know everything about this, but if the timeline was, look, yes, we exchanged a lot of phone calls, we had a lot of talks, and then there was this one horrible night where, I woke up and unconscious and I felt like I was being groped and it was horrible, and then I never called him again or I pressed charges, I think that's a credible timeline. On the other hand, I think the way this timeline goes is that after the date of this thing, she's claiming that more incidents happened and more things, and it's like, come on, man. I mean, you we're all adults here. You have to take responsibility for your own actions. The same way Cosby, if he committed this heinous act, he needs to take responsibility and he needs to go to jail for it. I firmly believe that. But for this woman who may or may not have been a victim, because I don't know and I wasn't there, it makes her timeline a lot less credible if she's saying, yes, and I continued soliciting advice from him, calling him, taking phone calls from him, having meetings with him. I mean, that's a tough one. It certainly weakens your case in court.
I'm just going to say, anybody who admits that they bought Quaaludes to give to women without their knowledge, that's right. That's fucked up.
He admits that.
So he committed a crime right there on the onset.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and then he settled, and he didn't think that would be admitted into evidence. So he was like, "Oh, I'll tell you what I did," and then,
right.
And then he was like, "It's cool, right?"
Right.
Because I paid her off. No, it's not cool. You're a fucking scumbag.
Right. Exactly. So, and I mean, this points to. This other idea, I mean, as a society, we've evolved and changed in terms of what we think of as consent. But as with everything, sometimes it goes too far in the other direction. What you're starting to see now, and again, I don't want to stick up for anybody who raped anybody, but what you are starting to see are these allegations that come about that essentially amount to, look, I got drunk and I regretted having sex with this person.
Yeah.
So later on, I felt raped and violated. And hey, in point of fact, that's a real cheapening of those that actually undergo this horrible experience. If you're actually raped, that's a horrible thing. And for people to kind of cheapen it by going back and basically saying, yeah, I wish I hadn't slept with this guy, and I wish I hadn't gotten so drunk, and so therefore I've been raped. That's really a bridge too far, and you are starting to see this. There's examples of this are showing up in court, but they're also sort of showing up in the literature. There was that case of Lena Dunham sort of going back and writing. I don't know if you remember this, but Lena Dunham, the actress, she had
from Girls.
Yes, and she wrote up her sort of, this is my story book. And she recounts this experience she had with she describes him as the only Republican on campus. I guess she went to a very liberal campus. So she's kind of demonizing this guy and basically says, yeah, I was drunk. I was at a party, and I took him home with me. We went back to my house. So voluntarily.
Right.
She wasn't pushed, coerced. She wasn't so drunk she couldn't stand or think. She voluntarily went with this guy when she was drunk to sleep with him back at her house. Then she and this is as she recounts the story. This isn't as someone else tells it. This is how she tells it.
Right.
So the next part of the experience is that she starts to have sex with him, right? So again, this is completely voluntary and not compulsory. At which point, she and I don't remember the exact details here, but it's something like she realized that he didn't have a condom on, and so she asked him to stop. At which point he stopped and left.
Right.
She describes that in her book as having undergone a sexual assault. Now, to me, that's like, look, man, there's a lot of red flags here. But at the end of the day, if you ask someone to stop and they comply and stop and leave,
right.
I think to label that as I've been the victim of a sexual assault, that this really cheapens people who actually were the victim of a sexual assault. And it's kind of this, everyone's a victim, everyone wants to be a victim mentality that we're seeing in our society. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with these Cosby accusers, because again, where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, if you get accused of 50 women of doing nasty stuff to them,
and admit that
he admitted, that's right. I mean, he admitted in court papers that he gave the pills to women specifically to knock them out. I mean, it's loathsome. And I mean, it sort of goes to the heart of, the strangeness of human sexuality, because here you've got Cosby. He could have had his pick of women. Women loved him. He was rich. He's an attractive guy, very successful. The thing that turned him on was incapacitating them. That's the part that he liked, because that's the part that comes up in every story, and that's what he admitted to. And so that's the part that just flabbergasts me, you know what I mean? But, everybody's got what they like, I mean, for me, that's not what I like at all, but it's that's his turn on.
Right.
And he indulged it. And I mean, I think really in terms of punishments, I mean, he deserves to go to jail for raping somebody if indeed that's what he did. And he does admit to essentially that when he says he gave women pills and did that. At the same time, it's like, at the very least, some revenge has been gotten on this person, because his reputation, I mean, he was America's dad and everybody loved him. And now in his 70s, it's just like, you're a rapist.
Yeah.
That's what he's known as now, is just a rapist.
Yeah. And he's always talking about, like, let's just get back to the laughter. You can't get back to the laughter when you've admitted the things that you've done.
Yeah.
You need to go to jail.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be any laughter anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this it's a very, very serious crime, and I'm glad that I haven't. I mean, I haven't had to experience it myself. I mean, another thing on this subject that is often overlooked is that it's seen as a women's issue, but men are raped all the time. Men are raped in prison all the time. Men are raped in the military and in institutions like this, and in private schools and places, all over the place. And the shame is so intense with that it's very underreported and it's very under-acknowledged, because the problem is most perpetrators of rape are men. I mean, something like 96% of the rapes, not every single one of them, but the vast majority of rapes are done by a man. It's just the victim is not always a woman. Often the victim is another man, like in the case of the Friedmans, where this guy was a child molester. He was molesting boys. Right. So, I mean, imagine the
always,
stigma.
Yeah. It's two things. It's usually a power crime. So it's like somebody trying to impose something on somebody, or, somebody who clearly doesn't want it. And because of that, they're the person who is taken advantage of and violated is horrified and shamed. And no one wants to come out and say, I was violated. My innocence was taken away, or anything of that nature. They'd rather just forget it, because that victimology of having to go back and tell somebody about it makes it very real.
Yep.
And then then you have to admit that this actually happened to you, and it's just a continuous cycle. And so, I think now is a perfect time to segue into something a little happier.
I hope so. I know. It's the rape show with Doug and Blag.
So, do you know who Randy Stair is?
Randy Stair? No.
So this is a guy who, guessing, was very into goth. He was very dark. He actually had a bunch of friends, and apparently felt completely alone and alienated from society. He worshipped the Columbine shooters, and he was hoping that he could do something that garnered the same attention. He posted rambling hour-long videos of him.
Now, is this a new guy?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a recent thing.
This is very recent.
Okay.
And I didn't hear much about this.
I guess the Columbine shooters are old school now, right?
Yeah, they're very.
It's been a while.
Yeah, but it's the craziest thing is that
See,
they're
to
like,
me, they're just youngsters still.
yeah, but this guy was 24, and he like posted all of it. He was in like Tunk. I'm gonna get this whole totally wrong. How would you say that? Tunkhannock?
Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and so he worked at a Weiss Market grocery store, and he usually worked a late shift. What he did is he decided that he posted several times that he was going to do something epic, and then he said he was at his limit, and he showed tons of guns on his blog and said tomorrow's the day.
Now, see, I got to stop you there. If you're really serious, why would you do that? I mean, that is just what's going to get you busted.
Well, and that's what I think he wanted.
Right.
I think he wanted to say, I think he wanted the attention that like the Columbine shooters got, but I don't think he wanted to do I think he didn't want to kill people.
See, it's all or nothing.
Okay.
I mean, I want my serial killers dead on, full on.
You want them committed.
I want my mass killers committed, yeah. I don't want them just trying to get the attention without actually.
Well, so he went in, he locked his coworkers in.
Okay, so this is something lighter, right?
Yeah.
We were on the rape thing, now we're on something lighter, mass murder.
Mass murder.
Okay.
This is vomiting rainbows.
Doug, this is why I love you.
Yeah.
Because you get in deep.
We like to keep it dark on this podcast.
Yeah, it is extremely dark.
This is not going to be, this isn't the Lucky Charms Happy-Go-Lucky podcast.
That's right.
This is why we're no longer on KFOG.
Right, yeah. This is the darkness.
Yeah.
I'm kind of digging this. We're in the nasty terrain.
That's why we're in my basement instead of at the KFOG studios.
It's kind of a blaggish thing.
Right, and Mike's slowly distancing himself from the podcast.
Yeah, he's no dummy. I'm the dummy.
Yeah. And so this is so Alistair, you can actually see pictures of him on heavy.com, which is where we get most of our stories. And so he is someone who he wrote this thing called Ember's Ghost Squad, and he animated it, and it was all about like these people who were out trying to commit these atrocities. and it actually garnered a little bit of a following. And he was hoping that he was going to be a famous YouTuber.
Right.
And in several of his things, he was like, I didn't ever expect to have to go to this lengths for fame, but I'm not getting enough off of YouTube.
Right.
So I need to do this, which is just ludicrous. I mean, this
well, I mean, you're describing the younger generation, aren't you? I mean, celebrities to them are just whoever's everybody's looking at on YouTube talking about and repeating. Like you and I sort of grew up with the idea that a celebrity on some level was someone with some type of talent who did something that garnered them praise and acclamation from people. I think we're now living in this younger generation of people who are just like, look, fame, whatever it is. You get famous for doing something mean. You get famous for doing something nice. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. You get famous for doing something atrocious or something heroic. Those are equivalent in the internet. You know what I mean?
But like the icons that I looked up to just really wanted a Pepsi,
Right.
So it was like I think the problems were a little
How are
different.
you supposed to know what my best interest is, Doug?
Yeah, they're trying to stay away from therapy and get a Pepsi. That's really all it is, and go skate. I think those were the big things. But like, I think this guy he posted a video with him posing with a gun, kissing the gun the night before he.
So did he do it? Did he do it?
He did.
Okay.
He actually.
He followed through.
He followed through. He executed 3 late night co-workers at Weiss Market.
Wow.
So these are people who are probably feeling the same as him.
Right.
Yeah,
like he doesn't even kill the customers who probably deserve it.
Oh, God.
He's only.
No one deserves it. But yeah,
Come on now, Doug. You can't. If we're going to go into the deep stuff, we can't keep putting out the disclaimers, right?
Right. I have to put out this. That's my part is to put out the disclaimers. But yeah, no. I think he the craziest thing is he went after people who actually considered him like a friend.
A friend, right?
Yeah. Like when he wrote about one of the girls that he worked with, and said like he was just mad because she was supposed to do a voiceover for one of the cartoons and she was taking too long to do it. And he was like, I'm going after her because she's taking too long. Like,
oh my God.
Somebody who like probably like in the same ilk as like she was just as probably despondent and sad as he was.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's...
So he killed a bunch of his coworkers, and they found him. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't just let loose on a full grocery store full of people. You'd think that's what you'd do if you were working at a grocery store and you were mad.
He barred in his coworkers so they couldn't leave, and then shot them. I mean, it was horrifying.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was really... and
how old is this guy? 19, 20?
24.
24.
Yeah. I mean, like everybody has that childhood teenage angst, but like if you're 24
right
and you haven't like gotten over that angst, then it's time for therapy. And I think
I had angst, but I never wanted to kill everybody.
No, well, I
or
think
anybody. I mean, really.
Well, that's because we just enjoyed beer.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's kind of funny too.
Beer and punk rock, it just made everything better.
Yeah, it's like, and when I think about these kind of stories, I feel like, oh yeah, I always kind of feel like kind of a misfit and a weird guy. I have my whole life, but it's like I'm pretty normal,
Right. But I think he also tweeted things like, "Are you ready to die?" And then he talked about like another massacre that occurred, and then he set the date, and then hashtagged it. So it was really
wow.
I don't know how more people, like one of his, they talked to one of his friends, and he said, I watched his his video blog all the time, and I just missed this last one. Really?
Oh man.
I think this is somebody who doesn't want to admit that he saw this and thought, oh, he's probably just not. He was a dark guy. Talked about this stuff all the time. Well, if he talks about this all the time, you need to flag him. But
what is the responsibility of people? I mean, what do you do? Are you going to be the local narc, or do you actually go to the cops about him and say, "Hey, I'm concerned with this"? Do you? I mean, and I think back on a lot of the weird, dark things that we would say as teenagers, and that I continued to say my whole life. I mean, do you flag people? Based on that, it's definitely kind of a strange First Amendment sort of question. Do you
flag Blag?
Do you flag Blag?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the way I always felt about it was, this is me blowing off steam. This is my gallows humor. This is my sort of nihilism manifesting itself in a safe way. And that's how I always felt about, violent films or violent music or violent rhetoric. But, there's this crossover line where it's like, yeah, but once a person actually goes and acts on it, then you go back and look at the rhetoric, and suddenly you're not so crazy about the First Amendment anymore, because you feel like, hey, that you should be able to say whatever you want, but, people should be able to respond to it. Well, if that's the case, I would have had people coming to my door all the time, especially as a teenager. I mean, I didn't talk about killing people, but I would definitely, I definitely said some very uncomfortable things. I mean, this is a hard one. Do we want to live in a society where you can say what you want?
I don't think that stopped when you were a child.
Right. No,
this podcast is definitely proof.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's one of the things that I would say about this is like, at what point do you flag someone like this? Like, at what point? Like, there was the guy who was driving around in, I think, Santa Barbara and shooting people, and his parents were like, "Hey, we were responsible. We knew that like he had issues. We got him to a therapist, and we were getting him help."
Right.
And he still went out and did this. Like, at what point at what point is like, what point does it cross a line? Like, the therapist has a moral obligation and a legal duty to say this person needs to be locked up in a facility because he is dangerous. And I think, I don't know if this guy got help. I don't know. I haven't. I think this is too new that they haven't really probably talked to his parents. But I mean, it's crazy.
And there's a real level of decadence here, too, because, of course, the other sort of cousin to this kind of violence is the mindless violence of the jihadis, the religious martyrs. And the question, but they feel like they're doing something that's actually good in this act because it helps to hasten the demise of, decadent Westernism and those who aren't part of the caliphate. I mean, I see something like this Stair guy, and it's just like, wow, you're doing these people's work for them. They love you,
Right.
the person who's just completely nihilistic and self-centered and goes out and destroys his fellow man, not even out of some inflated sense of this is my religion or this is what I need to do, but just simply out of the most gross, nihilistic, sadistic behavior.
Yeah, and then the other thing that was really kind of heartbreaking about this case as well is it seems like this was somebody who had made himself a recluse, probably because of a gender issue. Because he said, "I'm a girl has been trapped in a man's body for 2.5 decades, and I need to get out of it. And I don't belong on this planet, nor have I ever."
Oh,
So,
you just mentioned that? I mean, that
Yeah.
seems major. That
Yeah,
seems
no,
like
I mean-
a big part of it. But I mean, so this is interesting. I mean, just to show, and we were speaking about this before, about like the sexual repression of the
Right.
child molester that never acts on it. Here's this guy who, if he would have acted on his gender issues, maybe he wouldn't have massacred people.
right.
You know what I mean?
And it could have been the location that he was at. Maybe it's not a friendly town, or
Right.
you never know. And
When
so,
did he come out with the gender stuff? Was that at the very end, or was that part of his dark blog and all that?
No, he did not. As far as I know, he didn't come out with that. I think that was part of all the stuff that they found later. So he left like a huge. He said, "I'm leaving all these tapes, all my video recordings, everything, so you can understand exactly why I did this."
Wow.
Yeah, and it's crazy. And then like one of his last tweets was, "Goodbye humans, I'll miss you." It was really it was crazy. So
And he killed himself afterward.
right.
Interesting with it, because and here, okay, so here's where you get into the kind of uncomfortable stuff, right? Because we I can think of two films in particular where you have these gender dysphoric characters who turn out to be murderers, right? There was the one with Sharon Stone. I'm blanking on the name now. And then there's Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
Right. I mean, in Silence of the Lambs, you got Buffalo Bill. He wishes that he was a woman, or he thinks of himself as a woman. And people were Basic Instinct is the one with Sharon Stone. So in that one she's a bisexual, and it sort of hinges on that. In both cases, there were some pretty vociferous protests from gay people or transgender people in the case of Silence of the Lambs, and the idea being, well, here you've made us the bad person and basically acted like you've conflated our sexuality with psychotic behavior. And it's an interesting question. Is it their sexuality that is psychotic? In the case of this Stair guy, some people would say, well, yeah, somebody who's a man who wants to be a woman is crazy, and therefore he's done this crazy act. On the other hand, you could make the argument, if that side of his personality hadn't been repressed, if he could have just expressed his sexuality the way he wanted, maybe he wouldn't have dwelled so much on murder and mayhem and wanted to kill people. Maybe it was the shame that made him feel that way. But you could just as easily say, hey, maybe those kind of disorders really are mental disorders, and then you're really in a non-PC world.
Yeah,
I mean, remember 50 years ago, the physician's desk directory, labeled homosexuality as a disease and a psychosis, and and now we don't feel that way anymore. But these things change, and something like gender dysphoria has only pretty recently been seen as like, well, okay, this is a legitimate thing, but it doesn't mean you're crazy,
right?
And yet, for most of human history, or most of our particular civilization, Western civilization, we've labeled people who feel that way as just cuckoo.
Yeah, I certainly feel like it's one of those things that is probably very traumatic to come to terms with as a child without a support group. And my guess is that this guy just didn't have the support group that he needed to feel comfortable coming out or speaking. And if he had been in some area where they had more open conversations about this, I don't know. I'm guessing that this small town in the middle of Pennsylvania may not be the most open place, but I'm not sure. But I think that's one thing. If he were more open about it, he probably wouldn't have been so dark and so repressed and felt like the world was against him and how he needed to get off of the world and how he needed to end it all. So
you think it's more the repression than the sexual dysphoria that is the essence of the
I think
the
that
impulse that pushes you to this, but that's that's open for debate, isn't it? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like these things are fluid in terms of what we label crazy and what we then label, oh no, we just need to understand this kind of person. Because again, one could make the same kind of argument with child molesters. I mean, to bring it back around, one could easily say, hey, this is how I express my sexuality. This is how I really feel. Mm-hmm. These are my true sexual feelings. This is what gets me off. Who are you to judge me? And the answer is, well, look, the issue comes up, I guess, around agency, because an individual human just saying, hey, look, I was born with male genitalia, but I really feel like a female and that's what I want to be, is not hurting anybody else.
Right.
But somebody who's a child molester is imposing on someone else's freedom to be who they want to be. And that's really where these issues come up. And so like with somebody like Cosby, he admitted to really trying to steer a woman in a direction that she didn't want to go.
Not only steer, drug her, knock her out,
and force her.
Right.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is somebody who, what's so heinous about that kind of crime is that you're taking the agency away from the other person. I mean, I guess I'm more inclined to feel like no matter how kooky somebody's sexual bag might seem, if it's all consensual, I'm pretty much okay with it down the line. It might turn my stomach a little bit. It might not be somebody that I want to hang out with, but that's okay.
I would say that it's like you can have like a violent action to someone else, and if they're into it, that's fine. Like 50 Shades of Grey is super popular because it's all about dominance and people liking to be submissive and other people liking to be dominated and all of that. And there's a whole culture and a whole group of people who are very into that, and that's cool for them. But if somebody
50% of the girls who text me, I would say.
All right. Well, so I'm going to guess you are. But like if you come into
chew on that, America.
if you and I are drunk in a room and you start slapping me with a whip and being like, "Don't you like that, Doug?"
Right.
And I'll be like, "No, I don't." And you better stop and get out.
Yeah, I mean that's this is really the thing, and of course you're never. I mean, there are also these strange cases. I mean, talking about how murder might tie into this. Remember, there have been some of these cases where people advertised online looking for a victim, saying, "I want to eat somebody" or "I want to kill somebody," and people have actually volunteered for that.
That German case was huge.
And so now you get into this question.
He was videotaped giving consent,
Right, consenting to
to
it.
be eaten.
Yeah.
And then the biggest hang up of that case was the fact that they didn't think his IQ was high enough to give consent to be eaten. So, but I don't remember what happened with that case, but it was like do you ever watch the TV show, The IT Crowd?
No, what is that?
It's like it's a British TV show. It's really, really funny.
The IT Crowd.
Uh-huh.
And is it a comedy, like a fiction? Okay.
Dark comedy. So it's right up my alley. But one of the sections is all the nerds who are in the basement. This one guy, he comes over to his house and he's trying to do different things. And this guy says, I have this like 4K TV. It's really beautiful. You need to come over to my house and watch movies with me, and I'll make you dinner. And he says, okay, I'm totally into this. And he goes over there and he's watching this movie, and he realized the guy means I'm going to make you dinner. and he goes, oh,
it's like that Twilight Zone,
right,
to serve mankind.
And he's like, maybe not tonight. How about we get together for dinner another time and we'll watch another great movie on your TV? and then he keeps going over, and like the guy's like finally like, hey, when am I going to get to eat you? And he goes, okay, maybe we can't be friends anymore. And so it's this whole thing of how he like walks around and stair steps around this. But yeah, I was making fun of the German case where that guy actually consented. So
even consent is questionable, and this is where we really get into like, are we big boys in life? Can we handle our own choices that we make? Lena Dunham made a choice to get drunk. Then she made a choice to bring a guy home. Then she made a choice to begin having sex with him. Then she made a request, and then he left.
Right.
So, I mean, when I look at a case like that, it's pretty impossible for me to go, yes, sister, I'm in solidarity with you. You really suffered. It's like, no, you haven't. And this is, to label that as some kind of an assault is really an insult to the women who actually have been assaulted and the men who've actually been assaulted. You know what I mean? I mean, we shouldn't take these things lightly when we're discussing them. I mean, now you'll hear people saying, oh God, that parking was so expensive, I feel raped. It's like, no, right, man, that's not
a good way to
yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, it's the words matter, and the intensity of the words matters.
So I'm going to give you the last and final story, and we're going to do this one short because we've gone on for a while, but
we've rambled
a little bit.
It's hard not to when you're talking, horrid acts.
Yeah, well, we like to talk about it.
Yeah.
So the last is the case of Chelsea and Scott Bowman. They were married, they got divorced, and then they got engaged again, planning to get remarried. Not
a crime, although it's a little silly.
It's a little silly, but what would you say if the husband ended up dead?
What would I say? Well, I mean, I guess it would depend what the circumstances were of his death, Doug. What happened?
Well, they were going to get a free puppy, and a guy came over from Facebook to their house with the free puppy and then shot him dead.
And not her?
No.
Is that because he wanted to be with her? What was the...
It seemed, as she put it, he insisted on coming to the house. When he came to the house, he was drunk and got increasingly more agitated. Then he pulled out a gun. Scott, which was her former husband, ran and grabbed the gun. The guy shot and was actually wounded and shot like in the arm. And then Scott tried to run away. Obviously, if he's in a scuffle with a gun and he's just shot the guy, why would he run? It seems like he had the upper hand, but anyway, he tried to run away, but then somehow, I guess, turned and then got shot in the chest and was killed.
Now, why is it significant that they were together, then apart, and then together again? Do you think the woman might have asked this guy to come over, or is that the implication here? I don't know enough about this one.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It just seems to me to be suspicious. And nothing's been said about this. So this happened just a few days ago.
And has the guy been arrested? Do they know who it was and he's been arrested?
Yeah,
the shooter?
he was caught. So the guy was caught who...
And is he claiming any type of relationship with the woman?
No, there's nothing. He was they found him with blood on him and the wound, so it kind of matches up with her story.
Right.
I just feel like I'm such a skeptic, and I've watched so many of these crime shows,
Right.
that like even if this happened exactly the way she said, I'm like, come on, really? Like, he decides that he's going to kill the guy in the house,
But not her.
not her, because of why?
Right.
Like,
yeah, yeah.
I like, oh, he needs to leave a witness, or
Well, did he shoot the guy and run? I mean,
Yeah, that's what-
sometimes people get
that's
horrified.
what-
They do it, and then they just panic and run away. I mean,
Right.
it's
So
not
sh-
impossible to believe.
it's not. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's very suspicious.
Right.
And then the neighbor said that they were constantly fighting, and that there was the police had been called over, which they substantiate that there are constant calls of
Now that makes it that
yeah.
makes it more.
and
questionable.
both of them had domestic violence charges. Both of them did. So
Now, what happened to the puppy? That's my question.
I think the puppy's all right.
The puppy's okay. All right.
But they had a daughter, and the daughter apparently saw the whole thing.
Wow. So
Yeah.
can she testify?
Well, the mother says the daughter said, "Why are you shooting my daddy?" So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's unclear yet, but I think this is one of the cases that we're going to have to revisit,
Yeah.
because if this is true, it's incredibly fucked up.
It's a great headline. Why are you shooting my daddy?
Right.
You know.
It's like
It's got everything. It's got
the-
pathos, family, violence. It's got everything.
a puppy.
A puppy. I mean,
it's-
this is a story.
It's a good story. So we're gonna follow this one kind of along, but I feel like
I'll be here with you, Doug. If
to-
you want to get into the nasty stuff, I will go there with you.
I have no doubt. And so that's one of the things that I'm really feeling like my money is hedging that something's not right here.
Right.
This doesn't sound
Yeah.
like a crime of
Right.
like
And if it's a little kid, she'd be easy enough to fool. She wouldn't necessarily know that the
Right.
guy was in collusion with the mother.
right. Like she could have said,
But
see?
the fact that the guy got
I love
caught,
that. I love that even Ben's upset about this.
Ben kind of plaintively wailing in the background is my favorite part of this podcast because it lets you know, oh, here he comes.
He's going to come in.
He is a good-looking guy, this Ben fella.
So he'll wrap up this episode of Vomiting Rainbows here. Let's see if we can.
We're going to keep our eye on it. Come on,
No?
Ben.
Now you're going to be quiet? No? No, now he's just going to lick. So, anyway, so that's the end of this episode. So we'll check back, listen to us later. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter. It's all We Vomit Rainbows. And we're also on YouTube.
Listen, as long as you're advertising stuff, the
Yeah.
Dwarves, greatest rock and roll band of all time,
Ever.
you got to go to thedwarves.com, see all
Ever.
our dirty stuff. Hello,
Absolutely. Blag, the Ripper, the myth, the man, the legend.
In
Thank
the
you.
house.
Thank you for being on this episode.
Doug, it's always a pleasure.